I'm Dr. Affolter. Welcome back. And this time what I want to do is give you a little bonus video on philosophy. This is going to help if you've got a brain that needs a little help making this leap into being able to control it. And what I read a research article somewhere that if you have a reason behind making a change, it's easier than if you don't have the reason, if you know the why behind it. So that's what we're going to do in the philosophy and the science. We're going to give you the why behind it. Plus, there's going to be people that are telling you that what you're doing can't be done. Well, it might be nice to be able to explain what you're doing, the idea behind it, and being able to kind of defend yourself. So here we go. This is on the philosophy. We're going to start out with this idea of accurate thinking. So this is the idea of how do we think accurately about something? Well, let's start off with the time arrow. So the course is really based on the idea of a time arrow. Yesterday precedes today. Now I didn't add the time arrow for many years, and I was having a discussion with someone and we were going back and forth for like 2 hours. I was just trying to explain this concept of an intelligence controlling our bodies. And I thought I finally had won the argument, and then the person said, well, I don't know how time works. So I had to include this. We're going to assume that there is a time arrow. Yesterday precedes today. If there's a process, a cause precedes its effect. Okay? Well, that's going to be the next thing we go into. Now, I know, or I've heard, that physics equations can show time going both ways. I haven't found that that's going to be helpful in our idea of mental mastery, so I'm not going to use that concept. So as I just said, cause A must precede effect B. That's the other thing that we're just going to accept as a given. If there's a cause, and it's causing an effect, we're going to see the cause before we see the effect. That's just logic. Now, the next thing is necessary and sufficient conditions. So if a cause is necessary, then we can't have the effect unless the cause is there. So that's the first thing. Then a cause might be necessary but might not be sufficient. So if a cause is both necessary and sufficient, if the cause is there, then the effect has to be there. But if a cause is necessary but not sufficient, it won't be there unless the other causative things are also there. So you have to have everything. In order to be sufficient, all the causes must be there. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's look at fire. We've got to have fuel, we've got to have oxygen, we've got to have some kind of an ignition factor. If we have all three, we'll have fire. So if you just have fuel and you don't have oxygen, even if you have an ignition factor, you won't have fire. If you have oxygen but you don't have fuel, you won't have fire, right? All three of those are both necessary and all three must be there to be sufficient. Any one of those alone might be necessary, but it's not going to be sufficient. So let's look at how that goes together. So let's say we have a house, we have air with oxygen in it, and we have a kid with a match. Now, what's the cause of the fire? We get a fire, what's the cause of the fire? Well, the house, let's say the house is made of wood, so that was always true. There was always air, so the oxygen was always there. So what we look at and what we're calling the causative factor is the kid with a match. So we're saying that's the cause, even though everything must have been there in order to have the fire. Now, the fire does not cause the house to be made of wood. It does not cause the oxygen to be in the air, and it did not cause the kid to have a match, right? The cause arrow only goes one way. And this seems silly, but it's going to be important. This is going to come up in later lessons, so that's why I'm going through it now. Now let's go through another example. Let's say that we're on our way to work, and as we go out the door, the dog escapes, and it takes us 7 minutes to get the dog back. We get to our car, and it's all frosted up, and we have to scrape the windows for 5 minutes. And then on our way to work, there's a train crossing the tracks, and that slows us down 3 minutes. And we wind up being 2 minutes late for work. Now, what was the cause for us being late? So what was the cause of us being late? Each one of those contributed to us being 2 minutes late. But if any one of them hadn't have been there, we wouldn't have been 2 minutes late. So any two of those wouldn't have been sufficient. We needed all three in order for us to be those 2 minutes late. Now, let's go ahead again and notice that being 2 minutes late didn't cause the dog to get out, didn't cause the windows to be frosted over, didn't cause the train to cross the tracks. Now, what about this idea of falsification? The idea of falsification comes from Karl Popper, who was a philosopher of science. And he said that we can never prove something to be true. The best that we can do is to prove something is false, and then we can discard it. And that's really the basis of most science. In fact, in healthcare, I'm going to give you an example on healthcare in just a minute. But first I want to talk about Stephen Hawking. In his book, A Brief History of Time, talks about Karl Popper, and he talks about this idea of falsification. And he gives the example of the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. And he said, just because, as far as we know, it's always done that, doesn't mean it will continue to do that in the future. But if the sun came up in the west and set in the east just once, that would falsify this idea that it comes up in the east and sets in the west, and we could discard it. Now, in healthcare, what we do is we statistically compare an experimental group to a control group. And the null hypothesis that we falsify is that there's no difference between the two groups. Now, it's key that you understand that when you're looking at science research. What they're doing is falsifying the idea that there's no difference between the two groups. If there is a difference, it doesn't mean that we've proven something works or that we've proven something to be true. What we did was falsify the idea that there's no difference between the two groups. Now, the idea that God did something, created the universe or whatever, is a hypothesis that cannot be falsified. Because no matter what evidence is presented, the true believer will just say, well, I just have to have faith. I see the evidence, but I refuse to believe it because I have to have faith. So faith doesn't become something that we can falsify, so therefore it's not scientific. All right, already went through the brief history of time with Stephen Hawking. Now, what I want to get across now is once the impossible has been done, it's no longer impossible. I really got this from Arthur Conan Doyle in one of the Sherlock Holmes series. She has Sherlock Holmes saying that once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever's left, no matter how improbable, has to remain the truth. So if we remove the impossible, or if we show that it can be done, it's no longer impossible. And all it would take really is just one instance, and we would show that it's possible. Now, dualism is the idea that there's two kinds of stuff. There's a mind stuff, or a spiritual, or however you want to think of it. There's some kind of stuff that we're made of, and then there's the physical stuff that we're also made of, but that's the stuff physicists deal with. That's the science stuff. So the energy, matter, space, time, that's the physical stuff. The mind stuff is what we think controls the physical stuff. Okay? Now let's go into monism. So that was science of mind. In monism, there's only one kind of stuff. All there is energy, matter, space, time. If you're a physicalist, if you believe that all there is this physical matter. And what that means is that our brains then are what we are. We're just our brains. We're just a body. There's nothing else besides that. So what appears to be our mind is just an illusion created by the brain. Now, the other way that could also be monism is to think that all there is consciousness, and that the whole idea of a physical universe is illusion. So those are two ways to look at monism. And then free will is the idea that we can do what we want. Now, many people say we have the limited free will. We can do certain things, but for the most part, we're destined to be whatever we're going to be. In other words, there's a lot of things I can't control, and we can choose among some limited choices. But what I'm going to get across to in the science thing is, according to science and monism, if all there is energy, matter, space, and time, then there's no such thing as free will. I can't even control my thoughts. Everything could be predicted based on the Big Bang Theory and evolution. We're going to go there in just a little bit with the science. So to wrap up, we just went through time arrow, cause and effect relationships, necessary and sufficient conditions, falsification, monism, dualism, and free will. So that's the basis of the philosophy. And next, what I want you to go through is the science. We're going to start with the Big Bang Theory, go through Newtonian physics, through evolution, abiogenesis, then evolution. Then we'll look at quantum mechanics and show that if you can control your mind, it falsifies this whole notion that the brain is what's in control. All right, thanks for watching.